Okay. This time I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Castle County Planning Board. Today is Tuesday, February 28th, 2023, 4:30 p.m. Everybody, please excuse my voice today. I'm getting over a sinus infection, so if y'all could bear with me, I would appreciate it. So we have the call to order, have the approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? We no feedback. I'll entertain a motion to approve. Motion to approve. Second. Motion to approve by Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Daniel. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Next, we have unfinished business, the Watershed Review Board appeal of the chairman's motion to dismiss and the Watershed Review Board legal consultation. As you all know, at the last meeting, the decision was made on the appeals, and now the appellants have appealed the chair's ruling to the entire board. We plan to hear that today, but in conference with the appellant's attorneys and the planning board attorney, there was some confusion and debate about notice and the opportunity for the appellant's arguments today. So err on the side of caution, those appeals, or at least the arguments on the appeals, have been postponed until March. And Mr. Hoagland, do I need to read this motion as a matter of formality?
Yeah, just really as a matter of formality. The most important thing when continuing an appeal is to name a date, time, and place certain. And so this is just some kind of standard language that more or less addresses that.
Okay, Mr. Hoagland, I appreciate you preparing this for us.
Yes, sir.
I'll go ahead and read the motion. At the request of the attorneys representing the several appellants in this case, I move to postpone today's Watershed Review Board appeals hearing and reconvene it during the next regularly scheduled planning board meeting. That meeting will take place on Tuesday, March 28th, 2023 at 1:00 p.m. at the Castle County Public Library located at 161 East Main Street, Yanceyville. And that is my motion, and I'll need a second. Second. Motion, second by Mr. Harris. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
I do have one question I wanted to just get clarification on. So why did this actually occur? Does it have to go through this process of the chairman's decision and then back to the board, or was that just a decision that was made? Is there some statute that makes this? Why didn't they just do the board first time?
In reference to the appeals, I think we'll rely on Mr. Hoagland's expertise, but I'm understanding that pursuant to the general statutes, the appeal goes, the motion to dismiss goes directly to the chair. The chair makes a decision, and the appellants or the appellees, no matter what the event is, can appeal to the entire board. And that decision can be appealed to the local superior court judge.
That's correct. Yeah, I believe it's 160D-406 under quasi judicial procedures. So basically, the issue at question for the hearing was Sunrock challenged the validity of standing for the appellants. That type of challenge goes to the chair. The chair makes a decision, and then if anybody disagrees with that decision, then they appeal to the full board. So that's where we sit right now.
It just seems a waste of time to go through this twice. Just one.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? All right. Next, we'll go to the approval of the January 17th, 2023 special meeting minutes. I'd like to thank Mr. Hoagland and Mrs. Lau for preparing these minutes. Everyone had a chance to review them. right, hearing no feedback, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as prepared.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of January 17th.
Motion by Mr. Foster, do we have a second?
That's it.
Second by Mr. Thompson. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Do we have any public comments, Mr. Hope?
Unless our friend here would like to submit some public comments, I don't believe we have any general public comments signed up.
Yeah, I don't see any, so. So, Mr. Hoagland, going into new business, I know that we can't open up the public hearing till 5:30. So should we skip that and go ahead to the and review the Uplands Northeast Phase 2 major subdivision?
Yeah, I would say so. If you wanted to make a motion to officially amend the agenda, you could. Short of that, I think if you just wanted to skip it,
Okay.
then that would be fine. And if you want me to just clarify on that, so that's going to be our first actual site plan review under the high impact development ordinance, which is relatively new in the county. And any public hearing for those types of developments cannot begin any earlier than 5:30 p.m. So we're going to handcuff to your time frame on it.
All right, Mr. Hoagland, the chair will recognize you. If you could just give us some background information about the major subdivision, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The preliminary subdivision that you have before you today contains a proposal for 8 new lots, mostly along Highway 62 South, just north of the Alamance County line. 2 of those lots, numbers 7 and 8, are accessed by an easement from Hughes Mill Road. All major subdivisions, which are categorized as those containing 7 or more lots in Caswell County, must receive approval from the planning board in accordance with section 8.7 of our Unified Development Ordinance. As the ordinance requires, the developer has conducted a pre-application meeting with the planning department and presented a sketch plan of the preliminary plat. The subdivider has paid the necessary fees associated with review, and the surveyor has submitted the necessary number of preliminary plats for your review. And for those of you who did not receive an email copy of the plat, you will find copies of the 18/24 document on the desk in front of you. No road upgrade was necessary for this layout since all lots are already accessed by a state maintained road or a simple easement. Caswell County regulations allow for up to 2 lots to be accessed by an easement. You'll see that only lot 8 on this configuration is accessed by such easement. One unique feature that you will see about this proposal is that 3 of the lots, which are numbers 4, 5, and 6, are partially or mostly located within Alamance County. Though the ultimate review of the future development of those lots may be under Alamance County's jurisdiction, it is our responsibility to ensure that whatever portions of lots reside within Caswell County meet our subdivision standards. And I have found that the applicable portions of these lots do in fact meet those standards. Finally, in my review capacity as subdivision administrator, I found that all lot size, dimension, right-of-way, layout, and other requirements for all of these lots have been met, and it is submitted today for your approval. As you make your determination, please note that section 8.7.4.2.3 of the UDO gives the planning board the following 3 options. Option 1, to approve the plan as is. Option 2, to approve the plan with conditions. Or option 3, to disapprove of the plan. Any determination must be made within 45 days of initial consideration today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the proposed subdivision.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Looks like this property has quite a bit of road frontage on Highway 62. And it looks like there's going to be some interior roads too. Are those roads already in existence, or will they have to be built?
Well, the only interior access points along the northern edge of lot 1 leading up to lot 8 on the right-hand side, and then another larger lot on the left-hand side. If you notice, the lot description for that larger lot on the left-hand side was fairly recently recorded at Plat Book 17, page 874. That is a lot that's greater than 10 acres, which makes it exempt from subdivision regulations. So even though this 30-foot access easement technically accesses both lots. It is actually designed to a standard higher than what the ordinance requires. The same can be said for the easement that runs through lot 7 and accesses lot 8. That's perfectly fine under our subdivision regulations. As I mentioned, 2 applicable lots are allowed to be accessed by a simple easement. Typically, that easement only has to be 20 feet wide, but in this case, the developer has proposed a 30-foot wide easement. So technically, again, it's actually above the minimum standard.
Good. Any idea about the soil evaluation?
I know a little bit about soil evaluation just from what I hear from my neighbors down the hallway. I do know that relatively speaking, the back portions of these lots, and by the back, I mean, you know, if you're looking at lots 1 through 4 there, the areas that are closer to lot 8, I think there's a pretty drastic change in the soil makeup in that area where once you get past a certain point, you're really forced to locate the septic system back there. So obviously that's a question for our environmental health department, but based on the preliminary conversation that I've had, that's more or less the soil conditions for that area. Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Harvey, you mentioned that a lot was bigger than 10 acres. Where?
Yeah, so it's not included on this subdivision, but you see the 30-foot easement that runs back and ends with a circle and on the north side of lot 8. That easement actually also accesses the lot. It's outlined in dotted lines there to the north, but that's a greater than 10-acre lot, which was fairly recently recorded.
Are they, do you know if they're required to disclose that these are the side of Burlington North? So not proposal.
To a prospective buyer? I don't believe so. I get calls from real estate agents asking me those types of questions, but I don't think it's a necessary disclosure.
I think that condition, I'll propose that we approve of that condition.
That the future buyers are made aware of
So
pending.
it's to disclose to the buyers that there's a proposed facility that's under debate here. It seems, if I was going to provide the property, I'd want to know that.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I don't know that that can't be done, but from what I understand about conditions relative to a development, it has to be specific to that development. So typically sidewalks and landscaping and road access, things of that nature. I don't know, that may just be a bigger legal question that we'd have to kind of consult the county attorney and get back on is, can a condition of approval be disclosure to a prospective buyer? I just simply don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't think the UDO would allow us to do that, but that's probably more of a question for the real estate commission. I think the term is material fact. And that's probably more a question or an issue for realtors and the real estate commission. I don't think the UDO would allow us to make that requirement.
I don't know that it would necessarily be found in the UDO. I think certainly it would be in 160D. You know, the state gives counties and towns authority to impose certain conditions, but as I said, I think those conditions typically have to be relevant to the issue at hand. One example that comes to mind is counties and towns used to impose requirements that developers set aside a certain amount of land for schools. But they basically said, you know, maybe you're developing this subdivision and all of the inhabitants there, none of them are going to have any kids in schools, or they might send their kids to private schools. So it wasn't necessarily pertinent to that specific development. So that's just an example that jumps to mind based off my education in subject matter. So I just don't know. I think we could certainly ask the county attorney and maybe do a little research, but I just don't know.
All right, any other discussion? And Mr. Hoagland, again, based upon your observations and your knowledge of the UDO, is this application met all the requirements?
Yes, based on my review of it, it has. I did request a couple of items from the initial draft until what you see today. If you notice on lot 7, there is a barn that is encroaching with the setback. The plan prior to development is to completely get rid of that barn. It's from what I understand, it's just kind of an old dilapidated and abandoned barn. So over on the right-hand side, beside where the approximate line is, for Castle and Alamance County, you'll see a note that the barn on lot 7 will be removed. That is something that I had them specify because you can't create a new lot that is automatically a violation of the county setback regulations, for example. And so approving this without something like that would make this automatically a non-conforming lot. So we had to address that. One thing I wanted to specify was that with all of the lot sizes, that there was adequate land outside of the right of way. The county minimum is 1 acre exclusive of the right of way. So all of these are greater than 1 acre. And that includes the area that's in the right of way. And so based on my review, this is ready for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hope.
Yes, sir.
All right. That being said, we have a motion on the floor.
But I would like to get clarification on whether or not there is some, whether the county attorney has some decision on the disclosure piece. I was just looking at it again, it's not, that site is not directly adjacent to it, but I guess it's one property over. So it's not shown as, anyway, I just don't know what if we can drive a disclosure, then that would be good. If it's already required as part of real estate law, then that's perfectly fine. We don't need to take it out. I guess my motion would be to not approve it to the next amendment until.
Who owns the land on which the potential site for the asphalt?
Who owns it?
The site for the asphalt, Burlington North Asphalt Facility.
Yes.
It's either
That was saying that the asphalt facility would be built right above this.
Well, that's still pending, right? But that's, if you look kind of northwest of lot 1, that's where it wants to.
Who owns it? It's Blackwood.
No.
Spring LLC.
I think this Backwood company is probably the company that's selling all this other stuff.
Yeah, so Backwoods Land LLC owns the lot immediately north and west of lot 1. Then on the other side of that would be the Burlington, pending Burlington North Asphalt Facility. I believe.
Yeah, so as well. I think
It may be one additional lot over.
I think it's right there where that grid north. I could be mistaken too, but I think that's where it is.
Yeah, it's certainly in the neighborhood.
Anyway, I drive through there a lot, going to Burlington, so I see they're currently clearing tree stuff off this. Trying to get ready. I have no problem.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to postpone this matter until the next planning board meeting. Any discussion? Second.
Mr. Chairman, just point of clarification. So postponing, but also contacting the county attorney and researching about the specific condition of disclosure of the pending asphalt problem.
If people selling have to disclose.
So
The pending asphalt.
So is your question, is it already somewhere in state law that they have to disclose, or you want to make that a condition of approval?
If it's already state law, there's nothing supposed to do.
Okay,
If it is not, then can we draw the disclosure?
gotcha. Okay.
Well, the state law is the 160D that we approved the last couple of years, right? We go through and adopted.
Yeah, that would be where the language is on what conditions may or may not be allowed. I'm sure there are probably some court rulings as well that specific examples, but I think your question is there already existing state law about real estate disclosures, which is a little bit separate than conditions based on planning. And I'm happy to ask the county attorney both and do a little bit of research. It's just looking for whatever the pleasure is of the board.
Yeah, I'm just worried, it's sort of outside our purview here. The rest of the board wants to err on the side of the caution. That's fine. Just don't know that we have that authority. Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion on the floor to postpone this subdivision application until the next meeting and consult with the county attorney in reference to policy regarding real estate disclosures, geographic area. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. All right. Motion fails. The application is still before us. Since that motion failed, I'll entertain another motion. Second. Motion to approve by Mr. Petit. Second by Mr. Pierce. All those in favor, please let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Do we need to take any other action on the subdivision application then?
No, so that once the preliminary is approved, the developer actually has, believe it or not, up to 36 months to submit final.
Okay.
And I don't think it's gonna take that long, but the submission and recording process is very similar to how we process the other plat.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, moving on to planning department updates, Chair recognizes Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to Broadmoor, I don't know that I have much more of an update than what the county manager provided at the last meeting, which is obviously very comprehensive, and he's got much more of a finger on the pulse than I do in his conversations with Spectrum and other folks. I will say, just kind of anecdotally, fairly recently, probably within the last couple of weeks, I've gotten separate calls that I can remember from folks on Highway 158 West, just west Yanceyville, Newcastle Farm Road off of 119 South, and the Corbin community as well, where folks are calling me. They're seeing the crews out laying conduit in the line, having good conversations, talking to folks. Yeah, we're going to be providing service in this area. So just really positive stuff. You know, it's just that they're, I guess what it boils down to is they're getting down into those crannies of a lot of these places in the county. One thing I do want to pass on that our county manager shared with us recently is, you know, obviously folks will be driving home from work, they'll see the crews out there working, and they'll want to stop and talk with them. The crewmen, from what we understand, you know, they kind of get their directives on a day-to-day basis. You know, we're going to start here today. We're going to try to keep that mailbox. We're going to try to keep that flag phone call or whatever. They're not necessarily keyed in on the bigger picture, the bigger map that goes across county. So we've heard the folks will stop and talk to them and say, "Hey, by the way, are you guys coming down to my house?" And they go, "No, I don't think we're coming to your house." But that's just because they're operating on a 1 or 2 day or a weekly kind of schedule. So I don't, it's obviously not malicious, but it's just the type of thing where if people have questions about a specific map, they should go online, they should call the county, they should look at the official documents and not really talk to the folks in the field, because they may just be looking day to day and not really looking at the bigger picture.
If you go online, that doesn't help you at all.
It is hard to navigate the map. There's a disclaimer, there's some information on the county website that directs people to the county manager's office. You know, I'm happy to talk to folks whenever they call me, but I also direct them to the county manager as well. I think his office is probably the best entity to talk to. With regards to cell towers, I just heard back yesterday, actually, the Steventown Road site has acquired a building permit. They have broken ground on the site, and according to George Davis with TowerCom, the tower should be standing in March. Now, I don't know if that means completely done, but at least erect and being built out. He hopes to have the entire site done by April. That's gonna be the actual physical construction of the tower. Now, the backhaul fiber and getting Verizon to turn it on, all the rest, that can be a little bit complicated. The actual construction, what they're telling us, should be done by April, which I think is very good news. This is not on the agenda, but I thought I would mention it. The state is currently working on, or I should say our region is currently working on kind of a master transportation plan for 2024 to 2033. I can't remember the acronym that they call it, but it's a very standard 10-year kind of window of prioritization of construction projects throughout our region. I do know specifically in Caswell County that there was a pending highway improvement in Eden that got canceled. And in the overall prioritization of projects throughout the region, that prioritization for Highway 86 improvements shifted. We got bumped up, basically. So Highway 86, widening it out, in terms of things, safety measures, and traffic lights, got bumped up the list. But again, the final draft of that 10-year plan should be finished by this summer or fall, and I will be glad to share that with the planning board to make sure that everybody's aware of the 10-year plan.
So it'll be less than 10 years. The update on base will be less than 10 years.
So it's a 10-year projection of projects throughout the region. So it'll span from 24 to 33. I believe, unless it's 23 to 32. Roughly speaking, it's 10 years from just that now. And that's all I've got for planning department.
Have you heard anything on the cell tower on 158?
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's going to be a little bit of a point of frustration for me. I've followed up with Doug Barker now a few times. Once in October, once at the beginning of the year, once in preparation for this meeting. I have not heard back, unfortunately. Last I heard, the towers at 158 and Prospect Hill are built, but I don't think they're active yet. And the tower on Mice Road, more or less across from the elementary school from South Elementary, have been changed from Verizon to AT&T. I think anytime there's a change in carrier for whatever reason, it just creates several months worth of delay. So I don't think they've broken ground on that yet, and I don't think that they pulled the bill. So
Man, I noticed where they're constructing a stoplight at Park Springs Road in 86. Do you know of any other stoplights, proposed stoplights?
I don't know of any other stoplights. You may have seen the bridge construction on Baptist Parkway near Farmer Lake. But I'm not aware of any other stoplights. Those types of plans, even if they're minor, they will be, I think the STIP. I don't remember what that stands for. State Transportation. Those, even those minor projects will be included in STIP. I actually recently got the clarification on my role as county planner with more or less a minor advisory committee on these types of transportation issues through the Piedmont Triad Regional Council. So now that I got clarification on that, I plan to be a lot more involved, and I plan to make a lot more information available to the planning board as time goes on.
Are planning board members allowed to attend those meetings?
Oh, yeah, the public meetings, yeah, any member of the public. Yeah, and the one I went to most recently is similar to us, any public comments, and there wasn't anybody there to send public comments, so yeah, it's a public meeting. They are every other month, on a Tuesday afternoon at Piedmont Triad Regional.
Where's that located?
That's in Kernersville. I don't know the specific address, but it's not too far from Highway 40, so it's pretty easy to access. But that's all I've got for planning department updates. So
May I see where we have it's about 25 minutes before we can start the public hearing. Matt, would it be okay for us to go ahead and ask you at least to give us some background information about the proposed solar farm?
yes, sir, absolutely. And I think we can definitely do that, even if we kind of run out of things to talk about in the next 25 minutes. We can just hit a pause, and then at 5:30 opens up for any kind of public comments. But I'll be happy to begin, and then Mr. DeGrew, the developer, is here as well, and some other individuals who may want to speak. But yes, applicant George DeGrew has submitted an intended truck permit for a renewable energy generating facility or solar farm for a vacant 50 5.85 acre parcel of land on Oaks Page Road in Reedsville in the Stony Creek Township. The project name is Solaris. Renewable energy facilities are regulated as a Class 1 use under the county's high impact development ordinance, also known as the HIDA. Class 1 facilities require a minimum lot size of 10 acres, a 150-foot operation setback, but no land use spacing requirement. And our other things are obviously required in the ordinance as well. Mr. DeGrew has submitted a set of drawings designed by the Leeds Group out of Burlington, North Carolina, which include separate renderings for the existing conditions, the solar array plan, the grading and clearing plan, the erosion control plan, erosion maintenance requirements, and erosion control details. Mr. DeGrew has also submitted a decommissioning plan as is required by the ordinance. I also asked Mr. DeGrew to obtain a sediment and erosion control permit from the state of North Carolina, because anytime that you disturb more than 1 acre of land, those are required, and he has obtained that certificate of plan approval. Any of what I just mentioned to you just now, I'll be glad to bring that up. Any of those listed documents on the screen upon request. The HIDO further requires that applicants submit a copy of their driver's license, pay the required plan review fees, and undertake the effort to notify the public for a public hearing. Mr. DeGrew has in fact submitted a copy of his license, paid the review fees, and submitted copies of all documentation required for notifying the public. I have copies of those public notices, which I can pull up on the screen upon request. The ordinance also requires that county staff notify the county commissioners of such public hearings, and that the notice be sent to the county's email distribution list and posted on social media. These notices have in fact been addressed by myself as well as our wonderful clerk of the board. Editorializing a little bit. The HIDO further requires that a public hearing on these types of developments be held no earlier than 5:30 p.m. on any regular business day, which is what we are addressing today. These public hearings may happen in conjunction with other regular planning board business, which we've already addressed. As the ordinance states, quote, "Planning board shall duly consider all public comments submitted during the public hearing in making its recommendation, which shall be delivered to the planning department within 30 days following the date of the public hearing. Provided, however, the planning board's recommendation to approve or deny the application may be based only upon whether the application complies with the specific requirements set forth in this article. Within 45 days of the conclusion of the public hearing, the planning department shall make a final independent written determination of approval or denial of the application. Excuse me. Additionally, at this public hearing, the regulated industry and community members may comment on the application as well. In summary, the role of the planning board today is to host a public hearing, to receive comments, and to determine whether or not all requirements of the intent to construct permit have been met. If the planning board feels that they have, the board will give the recommendation to the planning department. If the board feels that the requirements have not been met, then they may request necessary corrections to be made, or they may recommend denial of the permit. If the permit is denied, that may be appealed to the county's board of adjustment. This is obviously the first such public hearing that we have had under the relatively new HIDO, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the application and the related documents before you hear from the applicant. As I mentioned, Mr. DeGrew is here, and I believe some of Mr. DeGrew's associates are here as well to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. Any questions for Mr. Hope? Mr. Hope, can you give us some background information as to why solar farms were included in the HIDO? Do you remember that process?
I don't remember specifically. There are 4 different classes of uses under the high impact development ordinance, and I don't know that I can recite them all for you based off memory. Solar farms, and there's one other use that are class 1. They're the most lightly regulated by the ordinance, if you will.
The only reason to have it in there was to make sure there was some kind of setback where you couldn't put solar panels directly on property.
Yeah, Mr. Oakley was on the committee to draft the HIDO at the time of its inception.
So I remember there was discussion at one point about making solar farms are part of the Idaho if they were 50 acres or 100 acres or more. But it seems that the Idaho covers any type of solar facility in the county, with the exception of residential.
Correct.
Use.
Yeah, any renewable solar facility, you know, if you install a solar array, just to provide additional power to your house, that's not regulated by the Idaho, but as you mentioned, a solar array is.
So what's the setback on it now?
So class 1 use is 150 feet from the property line. And they do not have a operation setback, and you might recall, operation setback is your distance from your property line to an applicable facility like a house or a school, or church, or something like that.
And you know that these solar facilities are also regulated by the state.
That's a great question, Mr. DeBrew, and I think we actually have an industry expert
All
here
right,
as
we'll
well.
get to that during the public.
I don't know. I seem to remember some conversations fairly recently about the state requiring certain actions for the disposal of solar panels. I don't know that that went anywhere, but I am certainly not an expert on those types of regulations.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Decommission plans.
Yes.
So I did read through that. Is that a requirement by one of our ordinance?
Yeah, the Idaho requires a decommission plan for all use types.
Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, Mr. Huckman, would it be appropriate to, I guess, go into a minute recess? Wait until.
Certainly, yeah, if you wanted to go ahead and speak with the applicant and any other individuals that may want to comment, you know, that may easily take up 15 minutes. And then when the bell strikes 5:30, open it up to the public, officially go into a public hearing. I think you could do that. I think you could hear information from the applicant and then begin the public hearing specifically at 5:30 or later.
Yes, sir.
As long as it takes place at 5:30 or later, you know, we've got that kind of time.
All right, there's no objection from the board. Go ahead.
Chairman Dawson, I didn't want to make sure, I've got a list of questions, but I won't ask you.
Okay, well, I think based upon what Mr. Hoagland said, if there's no objection from the board, we can hear from the applicant now. Okay, sure. So we'll hear from the applicant if you'd like to address the board.
Yes. Good evening, gentlemen. As Mr. Hoagland said, my name is George Dogu, and I have with me Engineer Kitch. Engineer Chad Hoffman. He's a civil engineer from this outer Berlin. I have Engineer Kit Hart. He's the electrical engineer. He's coming all the way from Wilmington. And I have White, which is a co-investor in Solaris Solar. Actually, we're expecting Mr. Stephen Callan's from North Carolina Clean Energy in who, as a matter of fact, has been with that institution developing renewable energy since it started in North Carolina, and he's a leader in it. He's a member of the board that wrote the ordinances that controls solar panel installation in North Carolina and most of the states of this country. He's expected to be here. If there are any technical questions, I will defer to the engineers that are here to answer it. But we're expecting that with the kind of approval of the board, we will be able to set the farm rolling before the end of the year.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foster, you have some questions?
Okay. I know these solar panels generate a lot of heat. What is the environmental impact, or has an environmental impact already been completed for this?
So the modules itself do not produce heat. So they may absorb some heat, some radiant heat from the illumination, but they're not a heat generating source. So the only environmental impact would have been stated in the decommissioning plan as far as any soils or any land use that may be abbreviated due to the decommissioning of the facility. But there's no leaching of any kind of chemicals, any kind of product. Those modules or those PV panels are encapsulated. And then there are some oil field transformers that would be typical, which you'd see at a commercial facility, at a grocery store, those sorts of things. And depending on the gallon capacity of those units, there may be oil containment that has to happen. Typically on these size units, the state and the federal EPA and the state EPA do not require any containment of oil.
Okay, so you don't have to do an environmental impact study.
No, sir.
How many households would this affect, these panels?
10 megawatts. Actually, 1 megawatt could affect at least 3,000 households. So if we're looking at 10 megawatts, we're looking at least 30,000 households will benefit.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how this thing works. Do you, so you get a household member gets a reduction in electricity bill?
That will depend on the agreement with Piedmont Electric. Because Piedmont, what we actually do is to commercially produce. And we have a PPA, then we'll have a PPA agreement with Piedmont Electric and UK. They in turn are the ones that retail it. So it can be used. And exactly.
But does the county have to pay anything, anything for it on this?
And we have not made any sort of.
Sorry.
No, we have not made that. No. No cost right now.
I got a quick question for you. Number one, this thing starts at 5:30 on my letter here. But anyway,
Yes, sir. Okay, so right now the planning board is just hearing from the applicants and engineers. At 5:30 specifically, they're going to make a motion to go into public hearing. It's just a little bit of a procedural timing thing, but yes, sir, it'll begin at 5:30.
but I was going to ask topographically, which way does the herbicide flow that comes sprayed around the units to keep the grass and stuff down?
They go to the creek. They go to the center of the property.
So it flows back on itself.
It's all going to itself.
What about the water table? It stays there? Does it go downhill?
There's no intrusion into the water table except the foundation. Stands themselves. Some of these questions are probably more appropriate to answer during the public hearing, but
Okay.
we would want to make sure that we're being fair to anybody that's coming later on. I think it'd be good to have a dialogue until we call time and they'll let it be somewhat
Yeah,
informed.
that's a good idea. Maybe we.
Yeah, we're only about 10 minutes out. If you wanted to take a break.
All right, we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute recess.
I'll ask the same question.
You're welcome to come up and look at the drawing in the recess time. It'd be helpful. Speak like.
And start. All right, so we're live. We now call the meeting back to order. And have on our agenda under new business, item A, Solaris Renewable Energy Facility Public Hearing. And I'll entertain a motion to go ahead into the public hearing, please.
Mr. Chairman, you make a note of the time, please.
Yes, sir. It's 5:31.
Thank you.
We need a motion to go into the public hearing. Make a motion. Motion by Mr. Harris. Second by Mr. Daniels, to go into the public hearing. All those in favor, let it know by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Public hearing begins. As most of you will note, Mr. Hoagland gave us some background information about the solar farm application. But the chair will recognize Mr. Hoagland again. Mr. Hoagland, just briefly, if you could just give us some background information about the application and how it applies to local regulations.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our applicant today, Mr. George DeGrew, has submitted an intent to construct permit for a renewable energy generating facility, also known as a solar farm, for a vacant 55.85 parcel of land on Opus Page Road in Reedsville in the Stony Creek Township. The name of the project is Solaris. Yeah, in his grouping of documents, he has included a rather detailed site plan, which includes the operation setback and in documents including the existing conditions, solar array plan, a grading and clearing plan, and erosion control plan, maintenance requirements and erosion control details. Any of this I can bring up on the screen as well. The HIDO further requires certain public disclosures on behalf of the applicant. I have copies of all of the necessary requirements for the public hearing today. And in summary, what the planning board's role is today here is to host this public hearing, receive input from the applicant, the public, and any other individuals who wish to speak, and determine whether or not all of the requirements of the intent to construct permit have been met. If the board feels that they have been met, then they will give a recommendation to the planning department. If the board feels that the requirements have not been met, they may request necessary corrections be made, or they may recommend to deny the permit. And any denied permit may be appealed to the county's Board of Adjustment. And again, I'm happy to bring up any documents on the screen. It might take me a moment because there's quite a few documents here, but I'm happy to do that and answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Hogan, based upon your observation and submission of the application, does it meet the guidelines of our local regulations?
Based upon my analysis, it does, even though there are a couple of gray areas, which I've spoken with the developer about, Mr. Huffines about as well. The most noticeable of which is the stream buffer running more or less through the center of the property. If you have a copy of the HIDO before you, I was actually just looking at this. This is a class 1 facility, and in terms of some of the land use regulations apply to class 1 facilities, the minimum lot size is 10 acres. The building height, if it's applicable, is 40 feet. There is no land use spacing requirement. There's an operation setback, in other words, an internal setback of 150 feet. There's a stream buffer setback of 100. Now, in looking at the ordinance, there's kind of a question as to whether or not that's 100 feet in both directions. In other words, 200 feet total, or is it 100 feet total? I don't know that the ordinance is entirely clear, and I had a very brief conversation again with Mr. Huffines about this. I would defer to him and his expertise on that as well. But that is something that I flagged earlier today. I had a brief conversation with Mr. DeGroot, and at this point, may be up to the discretion of the planning board as to whether or not exactly how we apply that standard. There's also, we had some discussions about a traffic impact analysis, given that this is more or less a private operation with really maintenance vehicles. I don't know that a traffic impact analysis would be required. And then Mr. Huffines could speak to this in more detail as well. But the ordinance also requires a groundwater and well study. I'm no industry expert, but based on the nature of how solar farms are developed, there's basically no groundwater disturbance, at least after development. So again, I think the industry expert can speak to those items that I've listed, but to me, those are kind of the only question marks at this point in reviewing these documents.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Yes, sir.
No matter the decision the planning board makes, it can be appealed to the Board of Adjustments. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And again, you more or less have 3 options. You can approve it as is, you can request changes to the plan, or you can recommend denial. Ultimately, the authority on approval or denial is with the planning department, but the board again makes the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Yes, sir.
We have several public comments here. The first individual we have is Chad Huffine. Chair recognizes Mr. Huffine.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. Chad Huffine, civil engineer for the project 505 East Davis Street, Wilmington, North Carolina. 336-227-8724. I just happened to be the first one that walked in, and I didn't really know the procedure. I didn't want to interrupt your previous business. I am one of the presenters, and am hired by Mr. Dorgu and Solaris Solar as the civil engineer. So you can direct any of the land use, traffic, hydrology, erosion control, perimeter buffers, those type questions. I'll be happy to address those. I'll take a seat. be ready to entertain any questions, including the three that Matt has raised in his opening presentation to you.
Well, sure, Mr. Huffine. So if you could just start off, does the state of North Carolina regulate solar facilities?
So George can answer that in a regulatory perspective, from the civil engineering perspective. The regulations that we are working with are specific to the state of North Carolina land quality section, erosion and sedimentation control. And the county of Caswell heavy industrial development ordinance. That are the things that we're regulated by in our state.
Okay, and were you involved in preparing the erosion plan?
Yes, sir, I did that.
Okay, if you could just give us some background information about what the rules are and
Okay.
how you plan to implement it.
So for a land disturbance, which includes taking up the topsoil, the grass, removing a tree and its root ball, if that work is greater than 1 acre, we are required by state law to obtain an approvable erosion and sedimentation control plan. In Caswell County, erosion and sedimentation control plans are sent to Winston-Salem. The Winston-Salem Regional Office reviews those plans and determines whether they are or are not suitable for implementation and will they work. Erosion and sedimentation control plans are performance-based. What we think will work, we propose, the regional office agrees or disagrees, and we all come to an agreement on what we think will work. In the event that a piece of a silt fence or sediment trap is not adequate during construction, the regional office has the ability, and often does, improve or increase the requirements or hardiness of our erosion control procedures. So that permit has been applied for and has been obtained.
Mr. Huffines, I see a certificate of approval on the screen. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir, that was done. It's probably been done a couple of weeks ago. I don't know the date.
January 17th.
Okay, so it's been a month.
And will, and I assume, is that NC Diener?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and will they send agents out to review the process interim basis?
In the process, for every new project, a pre-construction meeting is held with the engineer, the owner, the contractor, and a representative from the regional office. Then on a rotating as need as possible, based on the size of the state staff, they come and visit every so often. So initially, there's contact made with the developer, the owner, the person that's doing the work, the engineer who designed the work, contractor who's going to do the work, and the inspector who's going to inspect the work on behalf of the state of North Carolina. They all have a meeting, come to terms, set forth a little schedule. When do you think you'll be finished? So I can come and inspect it again. There are little benchmarks written throughout this plan that will give the inspector a gate to re-enter the property, so to speak, and say, did you do what was on the list to do before I inspect? Yes or no? If it's yes, we go to the next step. And then that runs as long as the land disturbance is active. Once the land disturbance is completed and the project's put together and the grass is green, erosion and sedimentation control plan is closed out, permits closed out, and it's just like a pasture with a lot of solar panels.
And at that point, will the owner operator regulate and manage the landscape and the grass and the shrubbery?
It's back to private property. So yes, if it was to come a grass fire and 5 of the 50 acres burnt, would be on him to exceed it back.
Okay.
Now, there are cases in Caswell County where erosion is noticed by a neighbor of any kind, whether it's a 1/10 of an acre, or 1/2 an acre. If mud leaves one person's property and enters another person's property, that state 1-800-STOP-MUD telephone line is constantly used. So a neighbor that's has business looking at the adjacent neighbor's sedimentation problem, there's always someone going to come look.
Yes, sir.
That was not a complete sentence, but you understand what I'm saying. If you're getting mud on me and I call 1-800-STOP-MUD, they're going to come find you and me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Huffine.
Yes,
Any
sir.
questions, Mr. Huffine?
If I can address, I guess, the 3 things that Matt had. In the ordinance, two of the three items, traffic impact analysis. It is my professional opinion that in this case, there is a significantly low enough volume of traffic, almost zero, long-term, that there would be no need for a traffic impact analysis. It would be less than any threshold that I can think of for a study or a warrant for the study. In the early stages of construction, there will be a low boy that comes in with a dozer and a loader, an excavator. There'll be trucks that are 1 ton, 2 ton trucks, dual wheels, size of a large pickup truck or dually that we have on the farms, or a service truck with a boom on it. There'll be bobcat size equipment. When I mean skid steer with 6-foot buckets or bush hogs, that type of equipment will come into the property. Will do its job. And then it'll leave. And then long term, there will be a vehicle similar to a bucket truck you see with Duke Energy, or maybe a personal pickup truck. And in some cases, maybe a truck and a trailer that would come in and service or change or move parts and pieces around. But there's the whole point of this endeavor is to have a sustainable, self-sufficient power source.
Is there a public access road?
I think in the next question that Matt had for me was the stream buffer question. The state rules require us to provide a 50-foot buffer from the top of the stream bank outward. If the creek is 5 foot wide at the bank, the total buffer is 105 feet. If the stream is 20 feet, the total buffer is 120 feet. The determination that you and your planning staff have to make is how this ordinance was written and the intention of this ordinance. Was it intended to provide that 100-foot buffer? Or was it intended to provide a greater buffer than what is required by the state? That would require you to look at the specific language in the ordinance. I'll be happy to comment on that as you look at it. My first thought is 50 plus 50 is 100. Someone that reads the stream buffer rules, 100 foot's gonna be the minimum. There's no stream at 0. So the average would be 100 plus whatever the width of the stream. I heard Mr. Oakley, I hope that's right, earlier in when I first walked in, talked about having experience writing in this ordinance. So you may want to talk amongst yourselves, maybe after you close the public hearing, in order to make that determination. It's often proper to reopen the public hearing if you need input from us after that. So we'll be certainly glad to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Montano. All right, next on the list, we have, it's George DeGroot.
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is George Dogu. This project itself has office in 114 National Highway in Townsville. That's where it's originating from. And just heard from Mr. Chad Hopper. He basically gave an overview as to this other portion of the plan. I have engineer Keith Hurts from Lakewood, Washington. He's an electrical engineer. He'll be addressing anything that has to do with that. And locally too, I just have Mr. Steve from the NC Clean Energy Center. He's been involved in the writing of, as a matter of fact, the ordinances for renewable energy, not only in North Carolina, but around the state. So they'll be addressing most of these questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. All right, next on the list, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, and I apologize if I mispronounce. Looks like it's Sekina Badiou.
Yes.
I'm the one.
Okay, would you like to address the board?
He already addressed everything.
Oh, okay, all right, great. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Steve Cowan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Thank you. My name is Steve Callan. I'm the executive director of a group over at NC State called the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. We're part of the College of Engineering over there. I was made aware of this meeting by George I wanted to be clear that I'm not a paid participant in this project in any way, shape, or form, but I have been involved in a lot of meetings at planning boards and county commissions, boards of supervisors up in Virginia over the last probably 10 years on solar project development. My expertise is that I've been in the industry and in the clean energy space since 1993. I have a long history of working with these kinds of projects, but I'm not an engineer. I'm not a soil scientist. I'm actually a policy guy who's been working at the center there in the College of Engineering. What I wanted to do today was just to let you know that I was available as a resource as it's our center. And if the board had questions that they had, a desire to get an answer to, that I would be happy to provide what information I have. And if you don't have the information on hand, I can take it back and do some research with the university. Also, I was the organizer of the first planning groups put together a model ordinance for solar development in North Carolina, which I'm sure you probably saw when you guys were developing your ordinance. I see the similarities in some of the fingerprints. If there are questions around that or around related topics, I'm also happy to provide any input that's useful. Just happy to be here, maybe drive up from Raleigh just to watch, provide what input I can.
Thank you, Mr. Calvin. Can you shed light on how the North Carolina Utilities Commission regulates solar facilities in North Carolina?
So the Utilities Commission's role in this process is really about the need for power. So there's really not a lot of involvement in their regulatory oversight that directly interacts with land use issues, other than perhaps the location of the project in relation to the rest of the grid. And so there's an interconnection discussion about where are projects interconnected? Is the grid in that area able to support the interconnection of projects? There's also a question that they look at, just basically to say, is there a need for this energy? And so those are really the things that they look on. The Utilities Commission is not in a position to deny a project based on, for example, a groundwater concern or those kinds of issues. So they say they have their lane. As was alluded to earlier, there's folks that do the groundwater piece, that do groundwater for all types of large construction. There's basically a whole series of state clearinghouse steps, different agencies that are responsible for different parts of development of any kind of project that have their roles in this process. And then, of course, there's the local oversight.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions for Mr. Calvin? Thank you, sir. All right, next we have Mark and Jen Manus.
Robert's Rules of Order got me. Well, as a property owner that does join this property, my curiosity is in topographically where the water is contaminated from herbicides and whatnot going to flow. I also have a question about how they're going to access in here. Is there a public access, and do they have to buy easements, etc.? And then there's been other questions that I had alluded to. They're talking about after 30 years of use, what happens to it then? Does it just sit there and collect dust? I doubt it. But those would be some of my main concerns that I'd like to have answers for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manus. And I see there's also, is it Jen or Jean Manus? Listen. Thank you. All right, I see we have other members present tonight. This is the public hearing, so if you'd like to ask questions or make comments, now would be the appropriate time.
I have a question.
If you could just please state your name for the record, please.
My name is Thomas Hall. I got a phone adjacent to his property. And when will this construction start? Anybody? I guess I'm not gonna get any answers now. It's just throwing them out. Okay. And I guess who's buying the power from the solar farm? Or get this answer. Yeah, we do. And is the county getting any compensation for allowing the solar farm? With the solar farm butting up to like my farm, Do we have any concerns? Because I have my farm in like a forestry agricultural tax bracket, and would it go to like a residential?
Is your question if your farm would go to residential? I'm sorry.
My farm now is in a forestry agriculture,
Yes, sir.
and I've been reading. Can that, could that change to a residential? And how does the solar farm benefit any of the neighbors? And I guess I've heard this from a lot of neighbors. How does the solar power threat to the economy and human health? It's improving about cancer, stuff like that. Is the solar farm going to create job opportunities? And what would the impact on the wildlife from the solar farm? And I think Mark touched on this about after the contracts out with solar panel, how that's going to be. It's kind of the same question. It's basically what I got.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Holman. All right, anyone else? Mr. Hoagland, could you address the one question about whether the county is benefiting or gaining compensation?
Yes, sir. Run me your name again.
Thomas Hall.
Yeah, I can actually address a couple of those. Whether the county benefits and then if your property would be changed from farm use, maybe into a residential category. So there's not really a tangible benefit for the county that I understand. The review fee for administrative costs to review this was $350. You know, any development that anybody undertakes in the county, there's some level of fee payment that goes along with that. I'm assuming it's going to be taxed differently than it would otherwise be if it were undisturbed property, but I have no idea how the tax department categorizes a solar farm versus if it were left in its current form. Mr. Oakley asked me the same question a few days ago, and I'll be happy to provide the information to our tax department too. They would certainly have the answer to something like that. Call it the question. Okay. With regards to your property changing, the answer is absolutely not, especially if your property is enshrined as a forestry management plan tax department status with the county, then no one's activity on any of the properties would ever change that status. As a matter of fact, even if the county instituted zoning, which the county does not have, because you are a bona fide farm agricultural property enrolled in a forestry plan, you would be exempt from zoning. So not only would this plan not affect that, but even if the county elected to enact zoning, it would not affect it. I know that's not necessarily the question you asked, but you know, enrolling your property in agricultural use is one of the strongest protections you can have.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland.
Yes, sir.
Can any of the reps answer the question on when the construction may begin?
So depending upon the outcome of tonight's meeting and your ruling, and then the planning director's ruling, permits we have currently would facilitate us to go to work tomorrow. So we could start as early as tomorrow. It's likely that it's 30 to 45 days from the night for everything to wash out and determinations to be made. But specific to go to work, construction could start as soon as the county says yes or no, because as far as permitting, we've already completed that.
We receive the permits from the building inspections.
Building inspections is specific to the electrical infrastructure. It will be applied for once those plans are completed. Can we go to work tomorrow? Yes. Would that mean building a solar panel? No. It would mean building this construction, temporary construction entrances, putting up silt fence, digging, seven traps, and clearing trees in the areas that need some improvement. So there's a specific determination. You go to work. In my mind, I'm going to go out there and start working on the property. You know, citizens' mind, and maybe when do we see solar panels coming out of the ground? And that's a function of permitting and further design. So it would certainly be after the initial land work.
Okay, and can you shed some light on the decommissioning plan, Mr. Hubbard?
I can let George or maybe Keith speak to that very much better.
All right, thank you.
So I'll add, my name is Keith Hart. I'm with Tungo Engineering out of Washington, North Carolina. I'll be the engineer of record for the electrical portion of the project. Speaking of timetable and schedule, once land clearing is done, first thing they will do is put up some fencing. But even prior to fencing, those preliminary designs, those 30% designs, those 60% designs, 90% designs, those all have to be completed. They'll go through the county's building permit process. And so the building permit officer will issue whatever level of building permit that is perfect for the design that we've submitted. The actual construction of burying wire, putting posts in the ground, attaching modules to racking, that's not done until they actually get the construction set. So that's some period down the road. But again, the land type of work, that is separate from the electrical and the mechanical work. And then the other question was the decommissioning plan. We did not perform that plan, but we performed many that under many counties in North Carolina. Every county has a decommissioning plan process. They're all a little bit different. We do tailor those plans to each individual county, whether it's a planning board or the building inspection office. But typically they're a 30-year plan. I don't know Caswell County's requirements, but sometimes those plans allow for reclamation costs, some don't, but it's a financial document that states after 30 years, this is what this plant is worth. And this is what it's going to cost to remove the facilities. And you would think, well, why does the developer just leave them there? Well, there's a lot of copper and aluminum wire in the ground. You've got transformers and you've got inverters that are electrical devices that have a lot of copper wire, have a lot of steel in them. So even at the end of their life, there's a lot of value in those. And so typically, again, in some counties in North Carolina, they allow for those reclamation costs to be included. And typically what we do is we estimate those costs of the price of those metals now based on reclamation. And we would use a CPI number to forecast those for the future. But in the same note, so is labor and equipment and any kind of decommissioning cost, the money that has to be paid to take that stuff out of the ground, we also apply a CPI to those as well. So it's really a financial document. Engineers prepare them usually in conjunction with financial folks because they know the cost of money 30 years from now. But pretty much every decommissioning plan that we've ever performed, we've actually got some that are being implemented now. We've got some facilities that have been in service for 30 years. Some counties require those plans to be updated on a periodic basis. A lot of the Virginia counties require that. We just completed one 5 years ago. That site is being decommissioned now, and it's fairly in line with the decommissioning plan as far as the costs that were estimated at the time. What's the benefit now is the price for those commodities to sell on the market is a lot higher than they were 30 years ago. So they're getting a lot of what they forecasted them to be. You're getting a lot more money for copper, a lot more money for aluminum, the glass encapsulation that's in those modules. They're getting money for that glass. So there's a lot of benefits that owner, which may or may not be the person that put it in, that gets for, it's in their best interest not to leave it in the ground because it costs more to leave it in the ground than it does to remove it and sell it.
And do you know if the insurance bond will be required to?
That is a local jurisdictional. We have some counties that do require bonding, others that do not. Again, I didn't get a chance to look at Cal's ordinance, so bear with me. There's no state requirement yet. That is a local jurisdiction. So the county planning board and the county board of commissioners, I don't know if you have commissioners or what they are, but they make they'll make that determination. Or you would make a recommendation, or that's in your purview.
Yes, sir.
I can't speak to your ordinances, but.
So I have a question. So I understand the financial side of this, but if you're if you're decommissioning a facility, does that mean everything is being removed at that point?
Typically, yes, 'cause if you think about what's in the grounds, we've got wire, we've got steel posts. And those are all a commodity that are worth salvaging. And we don't dig down very far when we put that copper wire or the aluminum wire on the ground, so it's very easy to pull it up. And it's no different than, it's a little deeper than tilling anyway,
Solar panels, the frame, the
All good.
structures, all that.
all goes away. You know, the rackings, the posts are steel, the rackings aluminum. And then you have copper wire. And then there's actually, I heard the other day that there's actually a plant looking to come to North Carolina to reclaim solar modules. And so, because what's in there, is you've got silver, you've got some very rare earth metals, you've got some plastics, you've got glass, you've got aluminum frames. Those are all salvageable.
And that's not regulated by the state and all that comes back to the counties. Either.
You're correct, yes, sir, that's correct. Now, the environmental impact of once that panel is accepted by a facility, that's still that facility of what they do with that module or that panel.
But yeah, you just, in other words, a decommission plan prevents someone from setting up a facility and just abandoning it and leaving it.
It does, yeah, yes. And in most cases, the developer is not the owner of the property. And so they have a land agreement with that owner. And typically in that owner's agreement, it says you will remove. Now, we do have some facilities that are going more than 30 years. Some, you know, they may repower modules, but the transformers and the inverters and the wire are still good. We're seeing some sites that could go 40, 50 years and still produce energy.
Let me get this on record. There is no environmental impact study done or need to be done. There is no environmental impact at all.
Other than division of water quality, those land type of studies, those have to be done. There's no electrical study, there are no EPA type studies that have to be performed on the site. That's correct. Again, other than the land cadastral type studies that he mentioned earlier. Okay.
How do you qualify for a site? Do you have to be next to like electrical outlet?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's a qualification. If you have a parcel of land that you wanted to develop, your first step would go to whoever the local electric utility is, in this case, it's Piedmont. You would sit down with whomever at that facility, at that company at Piedmont. In this case, it's Larry Hopkins, who was an associate of mine. We've known each other quite a long time. George called Larry and said, what do I need to do to interconnect this to your facility? And you will actually have an agreement with Piedmont. It's called a purchase power agreement. And then I'll also do a facilities agreement and an interconnect agreement. Those three agreements tell George the rules of how to connect to their utility. And so that is a private, I mean, those are private documents between him as the developer and the owner and the utility. And those are outside of the state purview, they're outside of local purview. He's more than welcome to share them, but that is a local, that is between two private entities to determine that.
And in this case, you're very close to a main power.
Yeah, Piedmont, talking with Larry briefly on this project, they just built the substation kind of around the corner from there.
Cherry Grove.
Yeah, Cherry Grove. I'm not sure how they're going to get to the property. That's up to the utility to determine, because per most utility requirements, once you have a site like this, now George may have to participate in acquiring easements. I don't, that every site is unique, but the utility will basically say, we want to be right here, and you have to get to us, or Piedmont, they say, we're going to get, we'll get our own easements and we'll get to you. But they'll have some point of what we call a point of common coupling. That's a fancy electrical term that says, where does Georgia's responsibilities end and where does Piedmont start? So there's a union point somewhere on this property, and that's where Piedmont will tell us, you have to come to here, and we'll take it from there.
And I think you answered this earlier, but just for the benefit of the whole group, this facility will generate how much power and potentially for the average home?
Yeah, it's about 30,000 homes. It's 10,000 kilowatts.
30,000?
Yeah.
I thought you said 3,000.
One,
30,000.
30, that one, he said this is a 10 megawatt or 10,000 kilowatt site. 1 megawatt or 1,000 kilowatts will serve about 3,000 homes.
So is that a reduction in the electricity?
It is not. So he will be selling this energy directly to Piedmont. And he will have a private agreement with what Piedmont will pay him for the units of energy that he produces. Then Piedmont will disperse that, and that's embedded in their rate base, however they determine to disperse that energy.
Mr. Daniel.
How many solar farms can that substation handle?
I don't know the size of it, that's a technical question for Piedmont. The way this works is that substation is serving customers, serving members. There's a certain amount of energy that's flowing through that substation. The solar actually offsets that because it acts as a generator. So if that's a 20 megawatt substation and there's 20 megawatts of load, the solar will be supplementing that by 10. I doubt there's that much load on that substation. Typically, that's not how I've 30 years in the utility business. I speak their language pretty well. But and again, Larry and I were colleagues when he was in another organization, so we know each other pretty. But it's more of an offset. So that'll be a determination by Piedmont. They have made a determination that substation can support this site, but it may not be able to support another site. And in North Carolina and most southeastern states, if there's any upgrades to the substation that are required, typically the first person that applies has to pay for those. Anybody that comes later can benefit from it. But then it's also the other side of the coin that the first person gets in and no upgrades are needed. The next person that wants to connect might have to make upgrades. So it's a double-edged sword. And typically the developer is the one that pays for those upgrades, regardless whether it's on the front end or the back end. I really can't speak for Piedmont on the size of what they have to. According to the feedback we've received from Piedmont, it has sufficient size to support. And they do all the studies to determine, make sure that it doesn't interfere with anybody's use of power, that you don't get, you don't get any types of noise on the line. They have consultants that do those studies. And if they find anything that fails those tests, it's up to the developer to mitigate them. According to what those studies have not been performed yet. We have to actually send this application with a set of drawings, electrical drawings, to Piedmont. Then they'll get their consultants to do those studies.
Are there any future applications that you know of other than maybe this one?
According to Piedmont on this particular substation, no. But those are private queues that we don't have access to. At the time that this was submitted as a preliminary to Piedmont, they didn't have any, but that was what, 6 or 9 months ago, Jordan. They could have had another one, I don't know. I mean, the public documents, you could speak, the planning board can speak to that, but, or the planning office, I'm sorry. But from the standpoint of anything that's in the Piedmont queue, that's a private matter.
I haven't received any additional applications for.
Where is actually this located on Open Space Road?
You can speak.
Is that the end of? At the end of the road?
Yes, it is at the end of the road. Ocos Page Road, it's at the end of Ocos Page. Of Cherry Road.
And you already have an easement.
No.
You already have an easement for that.
State your name for the record. Yes, sir.
Ain't that property landlocked, and how they get a right of way, do they have a roadway farming going in now, or how they get a right of way farming on that's on about a house? How did they get an easement by being landlocked?
Yes, sir. There was a question about the easement earlier, and I would direct that question to the reps, if y'all could address that easement question, please.
As far as ingress, egress?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to speak to ingress, egress.
Yes. Right, there was an easement on over the property, at least all the way from Ocos Page Road to the property.
Is that notated on the maps? Yeah.
Yes, it should be on the map.
Yeah, it is. There is a proximity map on a few of the site plan slides. If like the top right of that document, for example, there's a proximity map. And if you will give me a moment here, I can share my screen and I'll give you a quick glance from our county GIS system as well.
And they are referencing an easement coming from the north of 30-foot.
Correct, yeah. It's almost due north to south. Do you see the dotted line?
This is the parcel here.
That's correct, yeah. So the parcel here is selected and it's outlined with a dotted line. This is Cherry Grove Road and Ocas Page Road
Right here.
comes in there, yeah, and goes through the woods. This entire road that stretches along here is Cherry Grove. Yes, sir.
Hey, man, would you mind zooming in on that, please?
I will, yeah. When I zoom in, though, I lose Cherry Grove, so I gotta be real careful. Move the mouse and you may be able to access.
Here's the easement that's shown on the plat here. The portion of it is right here. But
That's the waterway.
is that the water? I'm sorry. I think it's right. Is it right?
That easement,
Right
you
here.
have to follow South Shore.
I'm sorry. So,
It's all right.
so it's, if this is the parcel, the easement, it starts right there.
Which direction does it go from there?
It goes up and follows this property line here, I believe.
That's correct.
That's what's shown on the plat.
What's proper line?
I don't know if it's a property line or just a parcel.
That's where the field is. Well, they can't drive across one of my fields.
No, it's on the other side.
It straddles these property lines here. Runs behind this house.
Yeah, I understand it. I've already looked at it. This is the George's land. This is Lois's land here. Mark, yours is over here. This property easement goes from George's and comes up to my property here and then follows up all the way, Ocas Page is here.
Why does he,
30 feet.
what's the distance from here in the state of maintenance? Do you get to?
GPS that you have to distance out on. I don't know the answer to that yet, but we'll get it.
It's gonna be precise. What, 6 miles? That's not from the end of state maintenance, that's from Cherry Grove. Would you like me to do the end of state maintenance?
Yeah, state maintenance is Cherry Grove, but it's still state maintenance. But it's not how far is the actual easement. So it's paid to be considered an easement.
0.5.
Folks, is that a recorded easement?
Yes.
Is that a recorded easement?
It has a deed book page.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Based on the plat.
We have an online commenter, I believe. If you want me to record this thing. Bill, are you there? Can you hear us?
Microphone off at the bottom, so you can read it.
Yeah, he would have to unmute himself. Bill, can you hear us? Not sure. Maybe he stepped away from his computer.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, fellow board members, any other questions?
There was-
Mr. Rhodes?
There was one question earlier about some other counties. So I just did a quick look up on Alamance. So they have renewable energy facilities as class 2. Their setbacks are 500 feet land spacing. So that would be from the property to someone's house or facility to get at that 500 feet. And they have 75 foot setback, operation setback.
All right, any other questions or comments?
I got one comment.
Yes, sir.
I can a lot of these people's land around here, my land don't join it. And I know some of y'all farm here too. And you got two things to look at. If you look at what's going on in the country, you take, and no food in 20 years coming in, you take a farmland and put it somewhere else and doing away with food, that's good. That's something you need to think about. I'm surprised Chad doing what he's doing, what his brother did, and what they did for him. I'm really shocked to see what you're doing. I know it's on my heart, but you gotta think about the future. And I know just because somebody's gonna buy a block of land and put a business in, it lives way off. That's something else. And that's what, in that area, we've been fighting for years. And the Zell Road, the Brown Road, all that further part, that map. And, you need to, when y'all vote, you need to think about the neighbors, the landowners, the farmers that support Calhoun County and video alike, like they do right here. And I know Mark, take Lois down and all that, but, that's something you need to take into consideration. I have so much comment on that.
All right, seeing that there are no other comments or questions or any further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Oakley to close the public hearing, and a second by Mr. Foster, I believe. All those in favor, go ahead.
I'm from the Cherry Grove community. I know Mr. Davis and Mr. Hall. And I own about 40 acres worth of land that I'm not on. So I can't go along with it.
Thank you, Mr. We've got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Public hearing is now closed. Mr. Hoagland, if you could just remind the board of our options.
Yes, sir. The role of the planning board today is to host a public hearing, receive comments, and to determine whether or not all the requirements of the intent to construct permit have been met. If the board feels that they have, the board will give a recommendation to the planning department. If the board feels that the requirements have not been met, they may request necessary corrections to be made, or they may recommend denial of the permit.
Are there any modifications that could be made to sort of bring a common ground here?
I think perhaps the only question marks that I may still have are some gray areas to be addressed is predominantly around the stream setbacks. Mr. Huffines spoke about this in detail and talked about what the state requires with regards to a 50-foot setback. I think perhaps it's worth having a discussion about the intent and interpretation of the ordinance. Is it 100 feet in both directions, or is it 100 feet total in spirit of state law? Scott Oakley was on the board or on the advisory committee to create the HIDOs, so he may be able to speak to this as well. But I would like, ideally, I'd like the planning board to maybe discuss that and clarify it. Then there were some questions about the traffic study and the groundwater study as well. I think as long as there may be some sort of documentation that address those from a professional engineering perspective, I think that would satisfy those areas of the ordinance, and that could just be as simple as a letter to satisfy those. But those are the only areas at this point that I would ask for clarification on.
Mr. Hoagland, do you think it'd be a good idea to table this until we can do a little further investigation?
If that's the pleasure of the board, you can certainly table it, bring it up at the next meeting and request clarification on the items that I just mentioned. Because ultimately the approval is with the planning department. So you can put this back in our court, my court, pending those additional documents. You know, you've got several options. Yes, sir. We have 30 days to give you a. Yes. within 30 days following the date of the public hearing. Now, if you wanted to continue and give yourself more grace, you could make a motion to continue this public hearing to another date certain. My question would have been if you have an additional public hearing, does it also have to be 500 feet? Because that's important, right?
So if we table this matter, we got to make a decision within 30 days.
Correct.
And our next regularly scheduled meeting is
March 28th.
28th.
In terms of what you reviewed, other than what you said, the current proposal is consistent with the
I believe it is consistent. I should mention this too. This wasn't really addressed, but the HIDO requires a landscape buffer along the perimeter of the property. Unless in the opinion of the planning director, the existing buffer will suffice. I did visit the site with Mr. DeGroove. I took about 9 or 10 pictures of the existing buffer. And you've got a lot of thick, relatively dense woods in there that I would assume haven't been touched in probably 30 or 40 years. And in my opinion, that will suffice as a buffer. As you probably saw on the GIS, it's really more or less an abandoned wooded lot at this point. And certainly around the perimeter, I believe that the existing vegetation would suffice as well.
And there is fencing that's required around.
Correct.
What are the requirements for the fencing? I know there was one wildlife question that may go to answer.
Yeah, fencing requirements.
Yeah, there are. That is in the National Electric Code and the National Safety Code. Typically, it's a 7-foot fence with a foot of barbed wire. And then there's actually a distance from the fence to any facilities that's a code reference as well.
I can't remember if that was a HIDO requirement or that's just your own personal protection requirement.
Yeah, I mean, we have minimums in the code. We typically exceed those. We don't build to the minimums. And they usually are well in excess of any zoning requirements. We will meet zoning requirements if they're in excess.
Is this chain link fence?
Typically chain link or a farm type fence. North Carolina, usually we use, most developers using chain link, 7 feet of fabric and a foot of wire.
Research on that, I don't know what do you think about it?
What do I think about what? Well, my personal opinion is irrelevant. I mean, it just has to be. Just in my analysis of this, I think it meets the requirements of the ordinance. As I mentioned, I've still got a little bit of a question mark on the stream buffer, the traffic analysis, and groundwater study. In my recent education with NC State and talking with them about stormwater management, soil erosion control permits, I'm kind of keen on looking for those, and I think that the development plans have done an excellent job of addressing those. So as I mentioned, I think if the planning board wanted to kind of deliberate the intent of the stream buffer setback and get some clarification on that, that would be ideal. And then I think the others could just be addressed from a simple analysis from the engineer. Got a question?
I'll be glad to comment to that if it's appropriate at this time.
Well, it's outside the purview of the public hearing, but at the board, that would be appropriate to hear from Mr. Hunt.
I think it's pretty open at this point, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a matter of procedure, typically I would recommend that the board find or make a motion to table this for about at least the duration of the next meeting cycle. That provides everyone with an opportunity to research the specific language in the ordinance pertaining to the width of the stream buffer. Because your ordinance could be written completely different than the state law. It could have been written in the spirit of representing the state law with wording that was not quite in the same semantics. It could mean that it was to double the state requirement. Till you all do internal research and maybe look at the minutes of the creation of this document, we can only speculate. And this particular view is not appropriate for an internal investigation of your language. So you need time to look at that. For that one reason only, I would recommend that you look at it next month. The two items that Matt and I are working together on would be the submittal of a traffic study or traffic letter. we would write that and say to you and to the county that the amount of traffic is less than the thresholds required for a traffic impact analysis. That's a document that's stamped by a professional engineer, and in my opinion, there's not a lot of traffic outside the initial construction, and that's what the letter will say. Topographically speaking, in relations to the perimeter above, the property is an old forest. It has been planted in pines and is steep topography. So it's either going to be farmed as trees or it's going to be farmed as solar. You're going to have to do a substantial amount of grading to get a field where you can put row crops out there. You can put pasture out there and grow livestock. But you're going to have the opportunity to do that with solar. You have the opportunity to do that with woods. You're going to have the opportunity to do that with goats or cows. So it's just how you're going to try to create revenue from a piece of property that has significant topography on it. So that's George's thinking in the presentation and plan in the first place. So once you take all of the consideration of what properties, how it's situated to the power grid or the accessible point of decoupling, how you look at its long-term disposal of the solar infrastructure, how you look at the removal of the existing woods, internal preserving the buffer. It's basically up to the private property owner and how he would be able to attend his piece of property. So that's the decision you're faced with. Once the three technical items that Matt and I are going to work together on. It's just my advice as a planning board member in other jurisdictions. You want to give yourself about 30 days to let that wash out.
What is the pleasure of the board? Got a motion by Mr. Daniel, to table our decision, reference to the solar farm application until the next meeting. Got a second by Mr. T. Favor presenting, number saying aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Mr. Hogan, if you could place this on the agenda
Yes, sir.
for our next meeting. I'd like to thank everyone who showed up tonight and gave their input.
I'd just like to add to that, I mean, I think appreciate Matthew and everyone putting this together because it helps the community with answer questions and otherwise there'd be lots of confusion in this public hearing for the purpose of letting everybody get informed.
All right, Mr. Hoagland, I think we've covered the entire agenda. Any further business to come before the board?
For me,
No further business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Adjourned by Mr. Harris. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.